Hey, so you're torn between the 14 Pro and the 15, the same price tag, got you scratching your head? Don't worry. In this video, I'll tell you all the differences between these two phones, which one to get, which one's a better value, which one has a better camera, and so on. Let's start with the price, shall we? That's probably the reason you're here in the first place. Both of these phones now roughly go for $900, depending on where you want to buy them. But the thing is, one is a new base model and the other one is a Pro model, but it's a year old. So there's quite a few differences actually between them. So I don't blame you if you have a hard time choosing, don't worry, we'll get through all the differences. And let's start with the design because I think it actually matters a lot. So I got here the 15 and it's made of aluminum and compared to stainless steel on the 14 Pro. And because of aluminum, it actually feels much lighter than the 14 Pro. But also the 14 Pro, because it's made of stainless steel, it feels much more premium. I know that's a subjective topic, but for some people it actually matters that their phone feels a bit more premium. And the 14 Pro definitely has that going for it. The 15 on the other hand is not only made of aluminum, but it actually has these kind of rounded edges compared to the 14 Pro. They're kind of more sharp on the 14 Pro. And because of that, the 15 feels much better to hold in the hand. But then again, because of the materials used here, the 14 Pro feels a bit more premium. And it's also got that weight going for it. I know some people actually don't like that, but the weight on the 14 Pro actually adds to the design. It gives you a feeling that you got more for what you paid. Also, the 14 Pro has 3 cameras instead of 2, and because of that, it looks a bit more appealing. And the 14 Pro, because it's made of stainless steel, actually it covers fingerprints like a magnet, so you'd be better off with a black one. And the other downside of the 14 Pro is it has straight edges, so for some people it might not be comfortable enough to hold in the hand. But other than that, the 14 Pro looks-wise, at least in my opinion, is a clear winner. Also, stainless steel is much tougher than aluminum, so if you drop your phone a lot, the 14 Pro is more likely to survive the fall than the 15. And because of that, if you want to use your phone without a case, the 14 Pro is a better suit because it's more likely to survive the fall. Also, I forgot to mention the iPhone 15 being a base model comes in a lot more colors than the 14 Pro. And if that's something that matters to you, you'd be better off with the 15. If you want something more luxury looking, the 14 Pro is a better suit. Alright, so let's move to the displays, and there's actually quite a few things to unpack here. Despite them looking the same and having the dynamic island, spec for spec, it's actually the same display, except the display on the 14 Pro is an LTPO display. And because it's an LTPO display, what you get with it is always on display and 120 Hz. And if you don't know what 120 Hz is it basically has twice the refresh rate of the iPhone 15, and it makes it look a bit more smoother. Most of the people won't even notice the difference between 60 and 120 Hz, but you'll definitely notice the difference if you go from 120 Hz back to 60 Hz. But if you have never experienced a 120 Hz display, the 14 Pro will amaze you because it feels much smoother. To be honest, that alone would justify it for me buying the 14 Pro instead of a 15 because 120 Hz is a must-have. And as I said, because the 14 Pro has an LTPO display, it can also not only go to 120 Hz, it can go as low as 1 Hz, meaning you get always on display with the 14 Pro, which you don't have on the 15, by the way. The LTPO display has actually one more advantage because it can regulate its refresh rate from 1 to 120 Hz. It can use the optimal refresh rate for what you're looking at. So if you're watching a YouTube video in 24 frames or 30 frames, it's gonna refresh only 24 times a second or 30 times a second, saving battery. Whereas the 15 will always refresh at 60 Hz, even if you're watching a 24 frames per second video, basically wasting your battery life for no reason. So if you watch a lot of content, the 14 Pro is actually gonna save you a lot of battery life. And also because the 14 Pro has an always-on display, you can use the standby feature, which came with iOS 17. The iPhone 15 also gets that feature, but it doesn't quite work the same because the 14 Pro will always show you the time and the 15 will turn its display off and then turn it on again when the time changes. And basically it renders the whole feature useless. Since I mentioned screen on time, let's move to the battery. And actually the iPhone 15 has a bigger battery, but as I said, the 14 Pro has a LTPO display, and because of that it saves you a lot of battery. So in terms of battery, they're kind of the same, except the 14 Pro has a lot of more camera features to offer, so if you use them, it'll actually drain your battery faster. But other than that, there's not really much to it. The 14 Pro and the 15 have similar battery life. One thing to mention though, if you want to buy the 14 Pro used, it's gonna actually have a worse battery life because the battery degrades over time, and the more you charge it, the more it degrades. So if you buy the 14 Pro used, it's probably gonna have a worse battery life than the 15. So if battery life matters to you and you only can afford the 14 Pro used, then the 15 is going to be a better choice. As for the CPU, they literally have the same CPU. The 15 has the A16 from the 14 Pro. Apple decided to reuse the chip from last year's Pro iPhone instead of giving it the new A17, which is only limited to the 15 Pro. So in terms of performance, they're literally the same. Alright, let's dive into the camera and see what differences we got here. And actually, you might think that the 14 Pro has a better camera because it's a Pro model, and that's kind of true, but also kind of not. It really depends on what you need. The 14 Pro, being a Pro model, has some Pro features to offer, but to be honest, if you're not using them, then the 15 might actually be a better suit for you. One of its features is actually Pro RAW for photos or ProRes for videos, and these features are only useful if you actually want to edit your photo or your videos, but if you don't care about that, if you don't know how to edit, then you would never need that feature, to be honest. But if you want to get the most out of your camera, Pro RAW is actually a must, because when you capture in Pro RAW, you capture the raw data with the photo, so the phone doesn't apply any editing to the photo, any processing whatsoever. So you can take that photo into Lightroom and then edit the picture to your liking. The iPhone 15 doesn't offer that. Basically, you get what you get when you press the shutter, and that's the final edit. The 14 Pro, you can adjust the photo to your liking. And if you want to practice editing or learn more about photography, then the 14 Pro is a much better suit for your needs. But if you're a casual user and you just want to point your phone at something, take a photo and have the phone do the processing for you, then the 15 might be a better suit, because the iPhone 15 gets some camera features that are more appealing for a casual user. Both of these phones can shoot in 48 megapixels, but the 14 Pro has a bigger main sensor. Also, the 14 Pro has a better ultra-wide lens, which allows you to shoot in macro mode, so if that's something that's interesting for you, the 14 Pro is once again a better choice for you. Not to mention that the 14 Pro actually has a telephoto camera. It might seem that the 14 Pro is a clear winner, but that's also only kind of true, because the iPhone 15 got some software updates to the camera, which the 14 Pro didn't get, despite having the same chip. And one of its features is auto portrait mode alongside with better HDR. What auto portrait mode means is that you don't have to use the portrait mode anymore for the blur effect. If you just point your camera at a human or at a pet, it will automatically capture the depth data, so you can activate portrait mode after you have taken the photo. Also, you can just tap to focus, and that will also automatically activate portrait mode. It might seem like it's not a big deal because it just eliminates one extra step, but sometimes you can forget to go into portrait mode, and with the iPhone 15 you make sure that all of your photos are in portrait mode even if you forgot to activate portrait mode. Also, because portrait mode now activates automatically, you're no longer limited to the 1 and 2x options. You can zoom in to 5x, let's say, and still take a photo, and it will be in portrait mode. Quality won't be as good as in the 14 Pro because the 14 Pro has a dedicated telephoto lens, but if you really need to, you can zoom in on the 15 and it will still take a portrait picture. Also, what the 15 can do and the 14 Pro can't is it can take 24 megapixel pictures. On the 15, this feature is activated by default out of the box, and what this basically means, while the 14 Pro can take 48 megapixel pictures, it can only do so in the standard camera mode. And on the iPhone 15 you can take 24 megapixel pictures even if you're in portrait mode. So the iPhone 15 completely destroys the 14 Pro when it comes to portrait mode pictures. But other than that, the 14 Pro has a much better camera system. So it really depends what you want from your phone. If you're a pro user and you want more pro features, the 14 Pro is a better camera. And if you're just a casual user who just wants to shoot portrait mode pictures, then the 15 is a much better choice for you. Also, what I've noticed in my testing is that the 14 Pro has a cooler tone to the pictures, making it look a bit more cinematic. So if you like that, that's also an argument for the 14 Pro. So it really comes down to what you need more. If you're a casual user, as I said, the 15 might be a better choice for you. If you want more pro features out of your camera, the 14 Pro is definitely a better choice for you. So that was it for the camera comparison. Let's talk about the repairability, because I think that's actually quite important too. And because the iPhone 15 is made differently, the replacement of the back glass on the iPhone 15 is much cheaper than on the 14 Pro. But as I said, the 14 Pro is made of stainless steel, so it's not as likely to break when it falls. So if you tend to break your phones a lot, the 15 is much cheaper to fix, but as I said again, the 14 Pro is much likely to survive the fall. So if you want to raw dog it and use your phone without a case, the 14 Pro is, in my opinion, a better choice. And one last thing I want to talk about, which is quite important, is the resale value. The base model iPhones don't tend to hold their values as good as the Pro model, and despite the 14 Pro being a year older, it's actually going to hold its value better. Even as of today, the 14 Pro costs a bit more than the 15 on some sites, depending where you want to buy it, and it's only going to get worse with time. The 15 is actually going to lose more value than the 14 Pro. So overall, the 14 Pro seems to be a much better phone. It's definitely more value for your money, and if I were to choose between these two phones, I would definitely get the 14 Pro. One thing I actually forgot to talk about is USB-C. The iPhone 15 adapted the USB-C, but it doesn't really make a difference because it's still limited to the speeds of the Lightning, meaning you get USB 2.0 transfer speeds and you don't get fast charging with USB-C. So the only real advantage is you don't have to carry a Lightning cable anymore with you, but that's about it. So in my eyes, the 14 Pro is definitely the winner today. It's overall a much better package. Tell me if you think so too in the comments, and also tell me in the comments if you also want me to make a video if you should buy the 14 Pro right now or wait for the iPhone 16. Tell me which phone you personally like more, which one you're more likely to get. And if this video is helpful to you, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more tech content. And with that said, I'll see you in the next one.